Hey, hi. Okay, we're gonna get started now. Hi everyone. My name is Maya. I am a junior sociology major here at UMass, and I am one of the co-facilitators of this lovely workshop.
And my name's Emily. I'm a current master's in public policy student. And last May, I graduated from UMass. I was an economics student while I was an undergraduate. And now I work with student activities and involvement. But in the past, I was involved with SEPA, which Maya is also a part of. And I'm the other co-facilitator. So we're going to get started. We made a Prezi. If at any point it's like moving too fast and is zooming too much, just let us know and we'll try to transition more slowly. So if that is becoming an issue, just raise your hand and we'll try to alleviate it. I know they can be a little disorienting. So welcome to UMass. Thank you for coming. So we introduced ourselves. I want to introduce the campus a little bit. So UMass was founded in 1863 as a land-grant university under the Morrill Land Grant Act. Since then, it's been a number of different types of schools. It started out as an agricultural college, and now is the university that is today. It's been a university since 1947. And since then, really since its inception, students have been organizing for some sort of change here. It may be because of the spirit of Massachusetts, and people are just outspoken and ready to take action. But we'll be focusing primarily on actions beginning in 1968 up until now. And we've broken those up not by time, but actually by the types of organizing that we felt they were for. So we'll look at campaigns for justice, power, and change.
So one of the first things that we are going to talk about is the 1968 student occupation takeover of the Mills House. And this was really how our African American Studies Department was founded, as well as cultural centers for students of color on campus. And so I don't know if you all have got the chance to get a tour of UMass. You probably haven't seen the New Africa House. But it was New Africa House used to be the Mills House, which was the first dorm open to black students. It was built in 1948, or around 1948. And in 1970, it was shut down and turned into what is now the New Africa House, which houses the WEB Department of African American Studies. And so the reason why it became the New Africa House was because there was a race riot in 1970, starting off as an altercation between a black student and a white student. Ultimately, about 30 students became involved in a physical altercation, and black students who were outnumbered, were still outnumbered at the university, but who were outnumbered at the time, retreated to Mills House, which is where most of the black students lived, and kicked all of the white students out of the dorm, and occupied it for around 5 days, demanding that there be a W.E.B. Du Bois Department of African American Studies, and also a cultural center for black students. And so the New Africa House also used to be the cultural center for students of color. Yeah. And this wasn't the first time that black students had made these demands. This was actually the second time around. Before 1970, students occupied the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs office in 1962. And so 1970 was kind of the culmination of getting their demands met. And a lot of the demands that we have now and later things that we'll talk about are very much similar to the demands that they had in 1970. So, yeah. And this is a picture from the Mills House occupation.
So the campus was really, was busy really throughout the 60s and 70s. There were Vietnam War protests and continual sort of strikes against tuition and fee increases in the 70s. But we chose to focus particularly on Mills House and the others listed because we feel they're really central to UMass and the way we've built power. So I'll talk about the 1987 CIA protests and trials. So in the 1980s, the U.S. was involved under the direction of President Reagan with the Iran-Contra deal, and the CIA was kind of complicit in a lot of violence in Nicaragua. And students at UMass were totally against that and decided to demand that, not only that the U.S. become involved in that, but that the university really not do any business of that sort. So in 1986, the CIA was actually sending recruiters to the university And students caught wind of this, and the then group called the Radical Student Union, or RSU, actually went to the Career Services office that was holding this info session and demanded that it be canceled and that CIA recruiters be taken away from campus. And so they were told that the recruiters did leave and that the session was canceled. And then what they found out is that the recruiters were allowed to stay and that the session was to be held in an alternative, secretive location. And so, this was kind of brewing. And then in 1987, Abby Hoffman, a famous organizer, and Amy Carter, the daughter of Jimmy Carter, actually came to UMass and participated in these large-scale protests. Students marched to Whitmore, which is the same building they marched to in 1968 and 1970, which is our administration building, and they were there. They were kicked out of Whitmore and then moved just kind of across the way to Munson Hall, which is another building on campus, which is now condemned, and they occupied that. And the police chose to forcibly remove all of them. There were about 70 participants, and they were all put on trial and arrested and then put on trial. So ultimately, it was a really contentious time, and really different than a lot of other protests, in that the university took a lot stronger action than they had in the past. So it was, it went all the way to the district courthouse in Northampton and got a lot of notoriety, especially because of Abby Hoffman and Amy Carter's involvement with the protests.
And to continue with the contention, in 2008, there was the Justice for Jason movement, which was really the story of a college junior named Jason, and he was attacked in his dorm in Southwest, but he was attacked in his dorm room and by two white students, and he fought back in self-defense and was ultimately expelled from the university. And so in response to his expulsion and in response to his attack, students rallied together. They marched to Whitmore, but also held various rallies throughout within the student union. And it really called back into question or illuminated the racial tensions that still remained on campus, even though the 1968 Mills House takeover was something that created spaces for students of color and for Black students specifically on campus. And this is a picture of students outside in the dormitory area in which Jason was attacked, and they're protesting there or holding a rally. Okay.
So one of the things that's really important to students at UMass is the idea of shared governance and student governance. So in the campaigns we mentioned before, students really were demanding not only justice, but in a sense, decision-making power to choose what was happening to them and to choose the course of action that the university was taking in response to the campus climate and the national climate. So the landmark piece of policy that we have here is called the Wellman Document. So it's adopted by our Board of Trustees in 1973, and what it does is give students the agency and the responsibility to have a voice and have a say in all the spaces that are primarily controlled by students. So at a university, every space is controlled by students and is for students ultimately. So since then, students have used the Wellman Document not only as a way to strengthen the power that they have, but also when there are violations of the Wellman Document, when decisions are made by administrators without information and consultation with students, we can return to them and say, we have this legislation. And so it really has been kind of a central theme that we've been building on ever since it was put in place. And so we'll return to kind of these grander ideas of what's been part of the spirit of activism and change at UMass throughout the presentation. So our next section is campaigns for power. And so we organized these this way because we felt that these are really points that students were fed up. Things were happening on campus that a simple occupation just wasn't going to do, that they really needed to amplify their power and their voice. So in the 1990s, we're jumping ahead a little bit, were a particularly tumultuous time. Not only for fiscal reasons, there were continued hikes and attacks on funding for public higher education at the state level, but there were also a lot of tensions between what were once called the Alana students. So at UMass, the designation that existed for students of color in the 90s and up through about the mid-2000s was Alana, which is African, Latino, Asian, and Native American. And so in the early 90s, there were strikes and occupations for tuition and fee increases. And in 1982, there was, some action taken by Alana students. They occupied the Whitmore building that we've talked about in response to the Rodney King verdict. And they were unsatisfied with that and the university's kind of response. And there's really a lack of support. There was and there still is a lack of support for students of color. And so that kept building. And then in 1997, students actually occupied Goodell. So the Goodell building was once our library and now houses a few different offices. But students actually stayed there for 6 days and would not move until administrators agreed to engage in negotiations with them and to meet their demands. And students from the surrounding 5 colleges, or the other 4 colleges of the 5 college areas, so Smith, Mount Holyoke, Amherst, and Hampshire, also joined students. And the numbers really rose, and the administration responded. And one of our panelists is also going to talk more in depth about this because she was there as part of it. So UMass really likes to occupy. At another point in the early 90s, our tuition was threatened, and UMass students actually won a tuition freeze, our fees keep going up, a tuition freeze that actually is still in place. So in-state tuition is the same rate that it was in 1995, but our fees go up astronomically every year. It's a good time. So, that kind of spirit really continued. And in 2007, this is kind of, for organizers now, so like for Maya and myself, when we were brought into organizing at UMass, this event, the 2007 student strike, is one that is really important to us. This is kind of like the ultimate piece of, it's not even myth because it really happened, but really what's inspirational and kind of highlights all of the demands that students had been making up until this point and actually are still making almost 10 years later. So for this, I've actually attached a short video that I think will really explain kind of better what the strike looked like, and you'll get to see some actual footage of the campus strike.
UMass students prepare to walk out on classes. Good evening, I'm Jennifer Tome. Topping our first 5 minutes are the protests planned on the Amherst campus. In a couple of days, thousands of UMass students here and across the state will stage a walkout. CBS 3 Springfield's Matthew Campbell is live in the newsroom to tell us why. Matthew?
Jennifer, it's a civics lesson in action. Students tell us this protest was months in the making, but after failed negotiations, thousands are prepared to show the administration that they mean business. Everywhere you turn, you can't miss it. These signs are stapled to nearly every bulletin board around the sprawling UMass campus. Roughly 25,000 attend the school, and Thursday and Friday, thousands plan not to show up to class.
The university is making a lot of profit and not always prioritizing students.
Some here are fed up with the administration and are making their demands clear.
They want more accountability, they want more transparency, they want more diversity here on campus.
There are 4 demands of the general students. First, student fee rollbacks. In the last few years, student fees have continued to rise, and students want to see them more in line with inflation rates. Second is funding and accountability for diversity. Students say not enough is being done to fund diversity on campus. Next, cops out of dorms. They may be there for protection, but some say it's bordering on invasion of privacy. Last, student control over student space. Some say places like the campus center and student union are being overrun by the administration. Student leaders say this walkout isn't a day to play hooky. They'll gather and have informational sessions instead. But others won't boycott.
I agree with them in theory, but I care too much about the subjects I'm studying about to participate.
The walkout is set for Thursday and Friday, but some in the student government say there is a possibility it could run longer. Live in the newsroom tonight, Matthew Campbell, CBS 3 Springfield.
So students really took advantage of the fact that they could get the word out, not only to get their fellow students to join them in the walkout, but also to put a lot of really, really immense pressure on the university to kind of recognize the power that they had been building for years. The strike was organized over a number of years. It did not happen overnight, and really culminated. It was the culmination of this kind of really, really important and intense organizing moment for students.
And very much in line with the demands of the student strike of 2007 are the demands of the 2015 Million Student March, which actually happened last semester, and various groups were a part of organizing this. So SEPA, which is the Center for Education Policy and Advocacy, as well as the Student Government Association, the Black Student Union, and Student Bridges, which is, we'll all explain those agencies and organizations later on in our presentation. But those were a few of the groups that really came together to organize the Million Student March, and some of the demands, well, actually the demands were very similar to the 2007 demands, but in addition, we demanded that there's a campus-wide $15 minimum wage. And that was a demand that came out of SEPA's Student Labor Action Project, which is a group that organizes for student workers and workers in general on campus. And students of color also demanded increased retention and recruitment of students of color, and that was from our organization, Student Bridges. And so we also have a brief video so that you can kind of see the moment.
The one thing I did wrong, stayed in the wilderness too long. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. The one thing I did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on.
Everyone has the right to community. Everyone has the right to clean air. Everyone has the right to clean water. These are not rights that are specific to the 1%.
We demand BDS at UMass Amherst. BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction. It's a goal from Palestinian civil society to pressure Israel to comply with 3 simple demands. First, end the occupation of all Palestinian territories. What does that say? Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for Israel's crime. Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for Israel's crime.
We demand that the administration show that they genuinely care about students of color by taking concrete steps towards recruiting and retaining students of color. We are demanding a survivor's bill of rights because survivors do not have to report to get support. Survivors' rights are under attack. What do we do?
Stand up like that.
Survivors' rights are under attack. What do we do?
Stand up like that.
Survivors'
Rights are under attack.
What do we do?
Stand up like that.
We want to be able to use the bathrooms we want. We want to be able to use basically whatever reciprocal we need to by the end of the spring semester of 2016.
Everyone, literally everybody in here deserves a $15 minimum wage, whether that be the dining hall workers who are serving your food, or the janitors who are cleaning up your vomit after a weekend. Healthcare workers, undocumented workers, we all deserve $15.
Hey, ho, ho. Poverty wage has got to go. Hey, ho, ho. Poverty wage has got to go. Hey, ho, ho. Poverty wage has got to go. Hey, ho, ho. Poverty wage has got to go. Hey, ho, ho. Poverty wage has got to go. Hey.
In order to achieve our goals of a free higher education, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 minimum wage, we have to put pressure on our elected officials.
No fees. Education should be free, no cuts. No fees. Education should be free, no cuts.
addition to multi-generational investment in a person's pursuit of higher education, in a person's pursuit of a public higher education, to allow that person to graduate from institution debt-free. So clearly, something is wrong with this system.
Or we can come here and demand a safer place, an inclusive institution, an institution that does not profit off of injustice, whether it be from fossil fuels or from the occupation of Palestine, or we are not playing with one another and showing up for one another. Students fight for freedom! It's our duty to fight for freedom! It's our duty to win! It's our duty to win! We must love each other and support each other! We must love each other and support each other! We have nothing to lose but our chance! 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 We have nothing to lose but our chance!
So as you can see, the Million Student March was very much a coalitional effort between various student groups on campus to get the changes that they need, or that we all need for our communities on campus. And so, yes. Oh, I lied. No, don't do that.
Escape. Okay. It's okay.
Isn't it?
Yeah, just go to that one. Sorry. Prezi is weird with videos. Uh-oh.
What have we done?
I don't know. Oh. Oh. No.
That's awkward. Oh. Yeah. There we go.
Sorry about that. While we try to figure it out, the next slide is actually going to be about our Student Legal Services Office. So the Student Legal Services Office was established in the early 1970s, and throughout all of the campaigns we've mentioned, save for those that happened prior to that, it's really been a central place for students, oddly enough, to get support. So it was established as a joint effort between the Student Government Association, which is the Undergraduate Student Senate, and the Graduate Student Senate, which at the time was informal, but still a collective group of graduate students. So they chose to have an actual legal services office on this campus to support students actually in matters against the university and against the administration. Unfortunately, throughout the years, the office has fluctuated in their ability to be able to sue or not to sue the university. So currently, it's no longer actually able to sue against any student of the university or sue the university. And the story behind that is that there was actually a student who was arrested by the university because of a series of small fires that started in her dorm room, or in her dorm where she worked in the 1980s. The university arrested her and accused her, and there was a lack of evidence. And so SLSO took this case, realizing that there was some real injustice done to this student, and they sued the university and won a considerable amount of money in a settlement. So at that point, the university realized that it really was not to their advantage to have a student-supported office with so much power, but in a way has really been central in helping students throughout the decades kind of understand their powers on this campus, and also helping us to support shared governance, which we talked about earlier in the Wellman document. Just, you know, since I've been a student here, we've had plenty of conversations with our lawyers who have continually been on our side and fighting for things, and, you know, really explaining to us the Wellman document and what that means for us and how much power we have on this campus. So it's a cool office, and more of what they offer now is education-based and legal support and representation. But back in the day, they really were able to do a lot more damage. And so, it goes to show kind of what a university response might be when they realize that something is getting too powerful. But at the same time, it hasn't limited the power that students have had. They still have that support and they still have that understanding from SLSO. So our final section is campaigns for change, like we mentioned. So we've talked about justice, we've talked about power, and campaigns where they're really, something really acute that happened that needed a response, or something that, students really needed to demonstrate their presence and power and voice on this campus to let the administration and other folks know that we do matter and that we really are the most important people here at our university. The campaigns for change that we'll highlight actually cover some different things. So, something went wrong and we needed to respond, but we needed a change to happen versus showing our power. So the first one I'll talk about is Involve Us. So this campaign was in 2011, which is actually what drew me in to organizing here at UMass. And what happened was there are a residential staff position called peer mentors. And some of you might have them at your university or an equivalent of them. And what they do is serve first-year only students and provide academic and other support. So they're kind of, they work in tandem with the RAs. And so our director of residential life decided on a whim that we no longer needed them. So in response, students at the Center for Education Policy and Advocacy, students with the Student Labor Action Project, and peer mentors organized around it. So the campaign was called Involve Us, and it was a long, over a year effort to reinstate peer mentors and to give them their jobs back and to keep the position on campus. And it was a successful campaign. It involved a lot of negotiating and more occupations, one of our favorite things to do. And since then, we've had peer mentors, and they're actually now trying to negotiate for a union contract and join our resident assistants and graduate employees in the union. So it was a really one of the most victorious campaigns of the most recent years, and what drew me in. So another campaign that I was also heavily involved in, that was just in the spring of 2013 and the winter of 2012, was our campaign for 5 votes. So unlike some of the other campaigns we've talked about, this one specifically targeted state policymakers, and we took our actions really to the State House. So it's called 5 votes because our Board of Trustees has 5 student trustee positions, but only 2 of them are allowed to vote. And that's because when UMass added its extra campuses, it used to just be 1 campus, which was Amherst. They decided they didn't want students to be too powerful on a 23-member board. They felt that 5 voting students was too much. So this was a campaign for 2 pieces of legislation, one in the Massachusetts House and one in the Massachusetts Senate, to amend the Massachusetts general laws to include 5 votes instead of 2. So the campaign actually focused a lot on social media and new ways of being visible as students, but we had to take a little bit of a different route because it wasn't as easy as just marching over to Whitmore, which is a 5-minute walk from our student union, but it really involved us showing up at Lobby Day, which is our annual Public Higher Education Advocacy Day, where we go to the State House and pressure our legislators to provide funding for us, and in this year to increase our student power on campus. So that was just, a little bit of a departure from typical campus organizing, but using the skills that we had all learned and the power that we'd built on campus to go to the State House. Unfortunately, the bills were left in the committee, but we haven't forgotten about it. And it's one of those things that, it'll continue to go on, and we'll continue to fight for that, those 5 votes.
Along that same vein, the next kind of campaign for change that we're going to talk about is state of emergency, and one of our panelists will speak a little bit more in depth about this, so I'm really excited for that. But state of emergency is a national campaign that was bred out of UMass, the organization Student Bridges, and state of emergency was made a national campaign by the United States Student Association for the recruitment and retention of students of color, as well as making campus safe for students of color. And it started off as a campaign at UMass advocating for an increase of 5% for all students of color. And as a chapter or as a member organization, member campus of the United States Student Association, we were able to bring it to the United States Student Association, which is USSA for short, and we're able to make it one of the national campaigns that the organization works on every year. And along the lines of organizing, students of color organizing on campus, there's also the South Africa Divest and Divest UMass, which are two campaigns. Divest UMass is happening now, but South Africa Divest was kind of the first divestment campaign that UMass had seen. And so Divest was April 1st, 1985, was started around April 1st, 1985, where approximately 400 students occupied the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs office because the university was breaching its agreement to divest from South Africa, from businesses that were invested in South Africa in 1977. And so approximately 8 years later, students were tired of the university being not responsive to their demands and decided to occupy the Vice Chancellor's office. The Board of Trustees conceded with the students' demands and decided to reinvestigate the policy or the decision that they made in 1977. But after a month of no response from the university, students marched into the treasurer's office, Robert Brand at the time, and 32 students were arrested, which is the most students that were arrested since the CIA campaign that Emily spoke about a little bit earlier. And ultimately, the Board of Trustees decided to, after a reinvestigation and after communications with students, the Board of Trustees decided to actualize or concretize the divestment from South Africa. And this was also a national campaign, and it really exemplifies and illuminates how student power and student, pressure from students can really enact change on campus. And so another vein of Divest that is actually happening now is Divest UMass, which was founded in December 2012. And it was founded as an organization to get UMass to divest from the top 200 companies that are invested in the fossil fuel industry. And this has been an ongoing campaign since 2012. Divest UMass has had consistent meetings with the Board of Trustees. And so this is something that we hope to see in the future. Oh, and this is a picture of some of the students involved in the State of Emergency campaign. And this is a picture of, I don't know if you all can see that too well, but it's a picture of UMass Divest at an action. Yeah, do you want to talk?
So the whole time we've been talking about a lot of action and planning and organizing. And the central place that all of that's really happened is our student union building. So we're connected to it right now, and some of you may have been there earlier, but it was built in the 1950s, and it's really the central space for students to come together, to organize, and to kind of take control and agency. At any given time, on any given day, in recent years, it's filled with students, but it's also filled with student agencies and student businesses. So the student agencies are places like the Center for Education Policy and Advocacy and the Student Government Association to some extent, as well as our craft center and our TV station and our radio station and our newspaper. So all of those spaces are places where students have been able to, they all have primary control. So they run those agencies and they're able to communicate with each other and share resources and really do a lot of coalition building and outreach to reach the campus and to use all those outlets, especially our media outlets, to put pressure on folks. So most of the planning for the campaigns that you've seen happened, in the wee hours of the night up in the offices of the Student Union building. And the other places that are there that I mentioned are the student businesses. So we have 7 of them on our campus, and they're all cooperative model businesses that are run by students. Most of them have been around since the 1970s, and those are also spaces, historically that have belonged to students and that have been a way that, we can kind of take agency in our space and also escape from some of the things that the university is trying to impose on us, and to really have that shared space to talk and to organize with each other and to heal, after a big action or after something's gone wrong. That's a really important space for us. So this is a neat picture of the building. Somebody wrote unionization on it. And, it's not only a physical space, but it's really this feeling that students should be united, and they should be working together. And those steps are where a lot of the pictures you've seen from our actions have been from. And from there, it's that we'll march on to Whitmore, which is our administration building. So, from students to admin, that's where we go. Yeah. So this presentation, we realize, has been a lot. We've tried to give you a snapshot into some of the most, what we felt were important and pivotal and unique moments in UMass's activist history. And we're really excited to announce that we have a panel following this, and I'll invite them up momentarily. But essentially, the kind of themes that we wanted you all to garner from this presentation were that what's central to UMass students and to students everywhere in building power is that using shared governance that we do have and advancing it has really been central for us and has been the primary avenue that we've used to work not only against but within the administration and the institution in ways that we can organize for power. And that also collaboration. So at times when our student governing agencies, so meaning our student senates and our organizing agencies are all working together really well, those are the times when our power is the strongest and our voice is the loudest. Anything you want to say? No. So thank you all for sitting through this presentation. I apologize for the technical difficulty. But at this time, that's okay. We can just invite them up and let them introduce themselves. At this time, we're going to invite up our panelists. A few of them might still be on their way, so they may be joining us within a few minutes. But we'll give those who are here time to introduce themselves and to get comfortable. But if you need to stretch your legs, that's okay. So if you're a panelist, you can come on up to the front of the room. I have a name placard for you, and you can choose a seat.
Yeah. Or do you think we should just leave them up, or do you think we should go through them?
You can keep them up.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, shit. Oh, fuck. We never printed our questions.
Oh, for them?
Yeah.
We can stay up here. And so once they sit down and get comfortable, do you want to introduce them and say, just kind of, do you know, Josh, Jenna?
It is now.
Testing.
I just turned it on.
Testing.
Yeah. Barely.
Okay, everyone. So I'm going to introduce our panel briefly and then let them introduce themselves. So we have students as well as former students on this panel. We have some questions that we're going to share with them that you'll all be able to see. And then we'll open it up for you. So there'll be a lot of time for discussion in this space. So I'll start down on the end with Josh.
Good afternoon. Okay, cool. Good afternoon. Let's try good afternoon. Hey, how y'all doing? My name is Josh Odom. I am a third year here. I'm a political science dual degree candidate in political science and legal studies with a minor in Afro-Am. I am the undergraduate programmatic coordinator for Student Bridges, founder and co-chair for the Organization for Black Leftist Unity, and I also serve as co-representative, for the People of African Descent Caucus for the United States Student Association.
Is this on? No, also? Yes. Cool. Hi folks, my name is Jenna Grady. I am, should I stop? Yeah. Okay, cool, thank you. I am a former/current organizer on the Peer Mentor Unionization campaign. I am currently bargaining on that first contract. I am a member of the Student Labor Action Project. And yeah, I think my list of qualifications might be, or like titles might be a little shorter, but trying to think of other things to make myself sound important. And I'm a social thought and political economy major and sociology minor, and I'm a senior.
Hi, I'm Jeff Napolitano. I was both an undergraduate and a graduate student here. As an undergraduate, I was an employee in the Office of Alumni Affairs. I was in the SGA cabinet, although I don't remember exactly which position that was. I was a community area governor, which is a very esteemed distinction that I can see in your faces. And later I was the president of the Graduate Student Senate and a member of the negotiating team that negotiated after the 2007 strike. Oh, and now I work for the American Friends Service Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Carvalho. I'm the current interim director of the Student Legal Services Office here on campus. Student Legal Services Office is a law office funded by students that serves students' legal needs. We provide legal advice, representation, and other support services to both undergraduate and graduate students. We also serve as general counsel to the governance organizations and their agencies and registered student organizations on campus. I'm also a graduate of UMass Amherst as well.
Can everyone hear me? Hi, my apologies for being late. My name is Felicia Lundquist. I also am an alum. I did my undergrad here, finished in 2001 with a double degree. Gotcha. And studied Spanish and sociology. And then I went on to work in admissions as a result of being an RA and admissions representative and tour guide here at the University of Massachusetts. Did a lot of activism here and was part of the 1997 Goodell takeover on campus. Also was part of the 1999 protest around race-based admissions process, and also working in the admissions office, felt very passionate about that piece. And stormed the admissions building as an employee, student employee. And then I, like I said, went on to do admissions work for both Hampshire College and Smith College. And I decided that I wanted to develop relationships with students in a different way outside of just recruiting them. I focused on multicultural recruitment, but I really wanted to develop more formal relationships where I actually got paid to work with students over time. And so I went back and did my master's here in higher education with a focus in education research policy administration, but also have a real passion for social justice, so work closely with SJE, which is a social justice education program, both as an undergrad. And Jimena Zuniga, for some of you may know her, I was able to work with her as a student on my undergraduate days, doing some of the IGD intergroup dialogue stuff before it was even sort of solidified here. So that's a little bit of my history. I come by way right now of Springfield College. I just received a position for their Director of Multicultural Affairs. Been 3 weeks there, and which is why I'm late here, because I was coming from over there. But prior to that, after I did my master's degree, I ended up at Westfield State University, and I was there for 3 years working in their TRIO program for student support services, working with students that were first generation college students, low income students, students with documented disabilities. So again, really focusing on underprivileged, underserved, marginalized groups. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Can we have another round of applause for our lovely colleagues? Yeah, and thank you all again for joining us here today. So our first question for you all is, can you briefly describe your organizing experiences at UMass, and based on your experiences, what would you say is effective organizing?
Okay. So I am somewhat of an odd case because I started organizing my first year at UMass, actually my first semester. I work for an organization called Student Bridges, which is a student-run, student-led, college-positive advocacy workshop. We work in Springfield and Holyoke. We advocate for students of color, first-generation students, and other marginalized communities, not only on campus, but within the Western Massachusetts area. So it's very interesting. It's usually the kind of narrative for organizers who are on campus is, they spend like their first year trying to, feel around, figure out what they're trying to do, what their niche is, and then they really start to get solidified within maybe one or two organizations. Their second year, then third and fourth year, they're on the e-board. They're really, pushing things to the best of their ability. But, I kind of hit the ground running because I joined Student Bridges my first year. So, but previous to my current role as undergraduate programmatic coordinator, I served as policy advocacy coordinator along with my friend Jasmine. When we were tasked with really researching the policies and protocols and procedures in which kept students of color out of the door, which kept first-generation students out of the door, which kept the retention and graduation rate of Black and brown students lower than white students. And we were really invested into the Diversity Strategic Plan, which was a large document in which the university was tasked to put out in terms of what the current climate was in terms of diversity, access, and inclusion, and then where do we still need to go. That was really the project that we were working on for the better part of 2 years since the summer of 2014. Since then, I also was working at the United States Student Association as People African Descent representative, which is where we passed state of emergency. So state of emergency, it was really interesting, and it really does a lot for me because we passed the legislation the day that Michael Brown was killed. So that was state of emergency version 1, I like to say, was initially just tailored to educational justice for Black and brown students, just as it was on the UMass campus. But that day just set off, as we all saw, that chain of events in which we came back the following year at the next Congress to pass state of emergency 2.0 because we understood that educational justice really doesn't mean a lot if Black and brown people are still being shot in the street with impunity by law enforcement officials. So our new campus or our new state of emergency programming features not only educational justice to stay true to the vision and the goals that we set out to do in 2014, but also has a number of features, including the now Baltimore Act, or more formally known as the End Racial Profiling Act, which gives more teeth to police officers or gives more teeth to prosecuting police officers who transgress against the civil rights of people of color and just people within the municipalities. I'm not going to go that much further into because I definitely want to hear from my panel mates, but I think that effective organizing to me means working across difference, and I really understanding that relationships are so important to this line of work, and the fact that we are the key word for me in social justice is the idea of social, meaning that you don't necessarily need to be an extrovert, but you need to understand that the building relationships, maintaining relationships, genuine relationships outside of just work is just as important as planning a rally, planning an action, and going through the motions in terms of lobby day. Because if we are then trying to then dismantle these systems, we need to understand we need to build from a place of love, and that only can be accomplished if we are building genuine relationships from the ground up.
I would just add to, I think you mentioned sort of using love. You used the term love, and that's something that I work with a lot. Building authentic relationships, I think, is really key to the process, and building trust to effectively organize so that you're trusting your allies who might not identify the same social identity groups as you do, but that you have a relationship and there's a level of trust, and that people are able to use their own privilege to advocate and to use it in a beneficial way. knowing your rights and your history was really important for me during the time that I was here on campus. So I learned that, and I think that it's still happening today, right? The same issues are reoccurring, right? It's happening again. We're talking about, admissions, for more students of color, admissions for low-income students, talking about financial literacy. And so I learned about the Millhouse takeover, and the New Africa House. So knowing my history and how, I don't know if folks even know about, I know that not all of you are here from UMass, but the Millhouse takeover was, again, similar to the Goodell takeover, where students were, asking for a space on campus, asking for, equal sort of opportunities for families that had children. And so all these demands were similar to the Goodell to the Millhouse takeover. So I think, knowing your history is helpful in effective organizing. And then building networks and effective communication, I think, and learning how to respond versus react so that you're actually heard. I think that many of you may know the difference, but, we can react, and sometimes our reactions are the same as a response, but a response is really thinking through things critically, and then sort of moving effectively and moving forward, whatever your plan of action is. So I would say respond versus react is part of effective organizing.
Cool. So I'm going to actually, can I see a show of hands who's here from UMass? Who's here from other Massachusetts state schools? I see you. And who's here from not any of the, okay, cool. Awesome. So I'm going to do like a kind of super brief outline of what I've done here on campus. I'm going to miss a bunch of stuff. There's been a lot of things that have happened in the last 4 years. So like Josh, I think I'm also a bit of an aberration. I came in and was organizing, or learning how to organize, I should say, within the first 2 months of school. I came from a super service-oriented family, community that put a lot of emphasis on giving back to the community and on providing social services and, tutoring first graders and giving food to people who didn't have food and all of those wonderful things. But I came to college and got involved with the Student Labor Action Project, which is a economic justice workers' rights coalition that is the product of the United States Student Association and the National Jobs with Justice, which is a workers' rights organization. So there's a chapter here at UMass. There's other ones throughout the country. And I got my first introduction to a power analysis and learned that, okay, so things don't just happen, right? These issues we see that we're responding to with service are not just happening out of nowhere, they're coming through systems. And those systems are actually, in addition to providing services, if we don't want to always be providing those services and having this nonprofit sort of need for nonprofit industrial complex and always reacting, we need to actually tackle those systems. So what does it mean to build power amongst people who are generally don't have that power, who are disenfranchised, who are marginalized? So that was my introduction in college. Got involved in a number of campaigns, largely around access, affordability to school, to workers' rights, unions on campus, all that great stuff. And one of the stories that sort of was part of my student activism childhood was the story of the 2011 firing of peer mentors on campus. I also had to come in late from class, so I'm not sure how much of this y'all went over. Someone raise their hand if I'm just repeating everything and you hate it. But in 2011, about 75 peer mentors who are live-in academic support for first-year students, a few grad students, and some other Res Life members were fired. They received an email before winter break that said, your job won't exist. When you come back in the fall, best of luck, apply to be an RA if you want to. And if we like you, we'll keep you on in a different position. So there was an immediate campus reaction. I was not here at the time. immediate campus reaction, really, really, really fast organizing to fight these job cuts. And so I came in, and they won. They won, and they got 34 to 38 of the jobs reinstated. So the job was cut, but it wasn't eliminated. I came in my freshman year, heard this story. That was like one of my big grounds. That's the Involve Us campaign. So that was what I sort of knew as a student victory that had just happened. And in my sophomore year, I took a job as a peer mentor. And the job had been expanded to 70 people again. And I decided, cool, let's unionize this job. Which was, I knew possible because the RAs on campus are unionized. And I had some friends who I thought would be down, pulled one of them into a stairwell after a staff meeting and was like, I know this is really sketchy, but I need to talk to you like alone, quietly, no one can know. It was like, hey, so do you want to make a union? Like, do you want to create a union? And he was like, absolutely. So that's how that campaign got started. We got in touch with the union, the United Auto Workers, who represent the RAs and who also represent graduate students and postdocs at UMass. And we ran that campaign for 2 years. The university fought us. At the state level, they contested it legally. They said, we're students, not workers. They said, we're cutting your job. You can't unionize, we're cutting your job. And the bottom line is that the state sided with us. We had an election. We won 47-2, and we have a union, and we're in contract negotiations right now. So that's like a super oversimplified version of what happened in the last 2 years of my organizing life. But yeah, so I would say, I'm going to bring it back to the question, which is like, what is effective organizing? Yeah, so I think one of the big things about student unionization is that it's not reactive organizing. There's an issue campaign, right? So when the peer mentors got fired, there was a reactive campaign. But after that happened, we knew that this was an issue that could resurface again. This was a job that didn't have security. And we knew that there had to be something in place that gave student workers that power, right? So institutionalizing and creating something that can last year to year, that ties together people's ability to organize together and also to have a base that prevents us from doing super reactive work all the time. And yeah, I think for me, one of the big things is shifting power to students. So it depends on there's a lot of ways to do that. Student worker unionization is certainly one of those ways. I was part of the 5 Votes campaign, and that was another attempt to shift power to students, to shift. Did y'all go over the Wellman document? Mm-hmm. Cool. So sorry. So like to actually bring us back to that document, that statement, and to put the governing power and the social power into students' hands. And I'm going to wrap it up there because I've been talking for like 20 minutes, and I'm really sorry.
So I, too, was an aberration when I came to UMass. I was a non-traditional student. I went to work before coming back to school. And so I was a little bit older than the undergraduates that I was with. For me, when I came back in 2003, when the Iraq War was just beginning, and so the circumstances that I came into formed a lot of the work that we did and that I participated in. I think that a lot of what's already been said is totally right on, particularly the piece about organizing from a place of love and having relationships and having your strategy come from a very positive place. People who know me will not be surprised, but I also want to throw in that you should be organizing also from a place of anger, because that is often and maybe mostly the cause for people to get out of their dorms and actually do something. And that's the balance that you have to strike, I think, and that's a very critical balance, because there are folks who are all anger and not love, and that's problematic for organizing, especially in a social context. I think that some of the aspects of an effective organizer, particularly on campus, is coming up with relevant and winnable campaigns. I mean, I can't tell you how many small campaigns were come up with that to, tackle some part of the Wellman document or some small thing that 99% of the campus didn't care about. I think some of the best campaigns that we had were the ones that were the most relevant to students, and in fact, the one that preceded or that caused the strike in 2007 was because we identified 4 winnable goals that appealed to a huge population of students, and that's how we got so many people to go over and sit down in the administration building here. I think that, again, in terms of effective organizing, because, especially on a college campus, just because students aren't here for very long, with some exceptions, that it's really challenging to have a relationship with somebody, activate them to do something, coming up with something good and useful to do, and actually do it before they graduate in those 4 years, or in some cases 5, or some graduate students I think have been here forever. It's a tough window of opportunity. And one of the things about university administrations, and this is not confined to UMass, is that they will often wait out students and wait for like the seniors who are the biggest rabble-rousers to graduate before they proceed with the next step of whatever their diabolical plan is. And so you all should be keeping that in mind. And one of the principles that was passed down to me by organizers that were affiliated with the Office of Alumni Affairs when I was here was whenever you go to a meeting, whenever you have any interaction with administration, you should always bring a freshman or a sophomore or somebody who's going to outlive the time that you are at school. And that's a key critical point to maintaining institutional memory, which is, again, I think was mentioned, you have to have a sense of where your place in the history of the university that you're at, what happened before, because that in large part defines what's possible in the future. And just the last thing that I'll say is that if you are in a student government or some similar institutional structure at school, the structure, the parameters of those things are often in place so that you cannot actually make any substantial change at your school. I mean, the reason why there is student government in a lot of places is just so that the administration can keep you doing things like plotting for planning out like prom or homecoming or whatever the hell it is that I wasn't very into the social aspects of school when I was here. So just keep in mind, if you're in a role in the institutional structure of the school, you have to remember that you got to get out of that and at least think beyond that, and that's a critical part of organizing on campus.
I think it's a great place for me to pick up, because as the lawyers for students, I think some of the role we play is to present the menu of options available to student organizers. Everything from that institutional mechanisms, the Wellman document's been talked about, what does that look like, how does change happen through policy, petitioning the Board of Trustees, votes of no confidence within student governance can be powerful at times. Talking about other options outside of that structure, petitioning legislatures, and then dealing more with civil disobedience, protests, demonstrations, and presenting opportunities for students to understand what are the sort of legal parameters around that. What is the university policy on demonstrations? What does the First Amendment provide? These are, as everyone here has kind of talked about, these are issues that happen and they reoccur on campus. And it's a great example. I picked up Tuesday's Collegian, right? The SGA is requesting information on the land use policy here on campus. Subheadline, policy may violate First Amendment. Answer, it does, right? So it's an issue that has been talked about on campus. This is a policy from 1990 that still exists here on campus and is enforced from time to time, not always. So helping students understand what does that mean. We're doing a memo for the student government, analyzing it under the First Amendment. Helping students with direct action, doing trainings, doing presentations so that you all know when the police show up, what are your rights, what do you have, what can you do, what can't you do. So I think we can really serve an important role in just infusing some information so that the activists can make those decisions on the spot, have that information, understand what they can and can't legally do, but may still want to do. And as long as that's an informed choice, I think that's ideal. So that's, I think, I love the role we serve, right? Because we get to be in the background, helping you all organize around the causes, helping you understand the best approaches and mechanisms to effectuate change, and just laying out those options for organizers.
I just want to invite Felicia to actually talk about the 1997 Goodell takeover, if you'd like to.
Sure. I mean, so it was 3 days that, so again, some of the demands were to improve financial aid and funding, admissions procedures for students. One big one that, as a person that doesn't have any children, that I wasn't as conscious around was childcare. Can be a big boundary or obstacle and challenge for many people. And being a traditional student during that time, it wasn't something that I was aware of. But so part of my process in my own activism was actually learning too, right, and educating myself. And then some of the other demands of stop discrimination, more faculty of color, more students of color, more support for poor working class students. So the organizing that took place it started with, we were gonna, like a walkout. So at noontime, everyone was gonna walk out of their classes and we were gonna go take over the administration building. So for those that are not from UMass, Goodell, at that time, I don't know if it's still, I imagine it still is, sort of the whole administrative building. So everything, all the functions of the institution came out of that building. So to shut that down would be to shut down, sort of, as we know, higher ed is a business. And so to stop the business from running, right? So we were gonna take over this, we were gonna all walk out of class and take over this building in order to be heard. And today I think a lot of the sort of, with the process and the policies, people would have gone to jail in today's day and age, but in 1997 it was a little bit different. And so they tightened that up so that there's sort of less of that sort of activism, sort of more, I don't know how you would describe it, but that sort of revolutionary, but just in-your-face activism, yeah. Speaking of in-your-face, this is me on the cover of the UMass magazine in 1999, talking about, again, race-based admissions, and it says, Chancellor Scott on affirmative action, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, my family was kind of like, Felicia. But it's, for me, this, talking about identity and development, this was part of my development. This is my activism here as an undergrad, as a graduate student, and coming back as an alum and giving back, so contributing. I might not have financial ability to give back, but my ability to come back and share with this group and share with others or work with students is my way of giving back. And all of this, the activism that took place, really developed who I am and the person I have become and the work that I currently do, working with marginalized groups. And so the takeover was my first year as a first year on campus. I lived in Gorman Hall, which at that time was, I don't know if there's still SERPs, which are special interest residential programs, but this was a program for students that had an interest in multiculturalism, diversity. Many students of color lived there, but it really was a space for anyone that was interested in diverse diversity in air quotes, if you will. And so, so I got really involved through this because I was searching for who I was as a woman of color, as a first generation, poor, working class person. I was trying to navigate this big university and figure out who I was. And so I got involved, and then I learned from that experience, and I got really involved and in your face, and so we took over a building for 3 days. It was a very interesting experience. And we talked about the word love, right? There were people inside the building, there were people outside the building, there were faculty, staff, students involved in this takeover, and they were, people were negotiating. And for the people that were in the building, they were there, they turned off lights, electricity, they didn't have food, and so folks on the outside were bringing in, I was on the outside, bringing in food, water, working with students to figure out, how do we get our voices heard in a way that is effective? Because that's the other piece, right? That you want to be productive, and that, what's the point of all this? You're missing you spend $85 a class. You're missing all this class. So you really want to make sure that you're doing this and that there is some change because of that. And so they were, in and outside of the building for 3 days, going back and negotiating and having conversations with administration. And finally, some of the demands were met. But again, I go back to, I created a list, the Millhouse takeover, which was out of racial tension between a couple, a black man and a white woman, and police on campus here at UMass. The Goodell takeover 1997. The protest on minority enrollment. As I was leaving, graduating, there was the RA protest on the RA union in 2002. Then there was 2012, the same sort of scenario happened. There was the increase of tuition in 2003. Justice for Jason was another piece that, while I was an alum, I was very connected to students, and I'm also part of one of the historically black sororities, Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. There's a chapter on campus, Pi Xi, and I am a member of the organization and was very connected and served as the advisor to the undergrads during that time, so I was still very connected to the university, and was very involved with Justice for Jason, again, racial tensions, and so it continues, right? And so, but it changes in terms of what does activism look like? What are you allowed to do? I wouldn't by any means advise any of the students that I work with to go storm a building today, because you might end up in some chains, in some handcuffs, some silver bracelets, right? That's not as effective, I would say, for me, because you're not going to be able to do what you need to do from behind bars. So. So I think going back to effective organizing is knowing your history, knowledge, and knowing your rights, and because that's also a big piece. Today, if you try to take over a building, it's probably not as effective. I don't know what else you wanted me to share, but
we have more questions.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you all. And so I also just want to say, you can go down the line. You can also talk with each other. You can popcorn back and forth. So don't feel constrained to that. But our next question is, because this is really about organizing at UMass, what do you think makes organizing at UMass unique, and what's special about our campus?
Well, I know I'm talking a lot, but it's only two things I would say. For me, it was the people was unique. I met a lot of my mentors that, again, or the people that influenced me. And so there was the Women of Color Leadership Network. I don't know if other campuses has something similar, but it was a safe space for me to be involved in. And they did a lot of workshops and trainings, which I think, again, goes back to the educational piece. So there's this cultural enrichment piece and this educational piece. For me, as a young person developing, figuring out who they were, that was a place for me to go to learn more about myself, but also learn about society and what's reality. So I think the Women of Color Leadership Network, SEBS at the time, which was the Committee for the Collegiate of Education of Black and Other Minority Students. I can't stand the term minority, but for that, it's now changed. It went to Alana Affairs or Alana Caucus to CMAS, and everything always evolves. And so, but the core sort of the fundamental sort of movement behind it, I think, is still there. And it's about support and educating one another. And so for me, those were unique pieces to UMass, was the Women of Color Leadership Network, SEBS, and my residential hall, Gorman, that really made it unique for me and enhanced my experience here at UMass.
I think for me, it's the terrain of Amherst and Hadley and Northampton, because there's not a lot of places for those folks who are not familiar with Massachusetts or Western Mass as well. UMass exists as a part of a 5-college consortium: University of Massachusetts Amherst, Amherst College, Smith College, Mount Holyoke College, and Hampshire College. So, and four of those colleges exist on one bus line. So therefore, if there are major protests or there are major actions, it's not that difficult to get from one place to another or from one college to another and actually bring in backup for larger actions. I remember that last year when did y'all talk about everything that happened on the Harambe floor? So just very, very quickly. Harambe, I think this is what you're talking about. Like, it's called the Defined Residential Communities. Harambe is one of the defined residential communities that caters to Black students and students of the African diaspora. And last year there was a series of racial hate crimes, epithets scrawled or drawn on people's doors. One of those doors happened to be my own, and it said, kill these N-words on the door, kill these Mexicans on another one of my colleagues. So that prompted a major response, as you can just imagine. And a lot of the people that came to these meetings were a bunch of UMass students, but a lot of folks from Hampshire College, from Mount Holyoke, a lot of our friends who deal with the same things on campus. It was a real showing of solidarity to see that we can then activate almost at a moment's notice, not almost at a moment's notice, and we can then support each other even though that we may be going to different schools. UMass happens to be the only public university within the 5-college consortium, but that still doesn't change the fact that we're still Black students, we're still marginalized students on campuses that were not designed for us. I think the biggest thing that I can take away from my organizing experiences at UMass was you need to then understand the terrain that you're working in. You need to understand that the resources that you may be able to tap into, they might not even be at your university, but there are other spaces in close proximity that can have resources, that have people that are willing to help, and you need to take advantage of those.
So the fact that this is a public university, I think, is a big distinction, but also it's a university that has a history of having troublemakers, and I mean, just this panel is sort of a testament. Except for you, Corey. This panel is sort of a testament to that. And to some extent, the administration expects that there's going to be some level of rebellion and resistance from the student body. But also the politics of the area is definitely a thing that makes UMass stand out from a lot of other colleges, combined with the fact that there are the other 4 of the 5 colleges, and the fact that there's a unionized faculty, there's unionized graduate students, and now there's unionized undergraduate students, and you don't get that at many other colleges. So that is one of the big distinctions, and one of the benefits it adds to the climate of organizing on campus.
I think the UMPD would say differently about me, Jeff, but that's all right. I agree with Jeff that this university has a rich history of activism, building takeovers. Felicia has touched on a few. There's a long history of building takeovers on this campus. And I think that to some extent, some chancellors on this campus, the current ones, celebrate that history of activism and social justice and progressive politics on this campus. And so I think it is very much ingrained into this institution. And so when students step onto campus, that immediately, I think, begins to infuse their thought process. And as I said, I was a student here before I worked at Student Legal Services Office. So I've really been able to experience that. And the goals of students have always been, what's next? What can we improve upon? And not being satisfied with what they're told or what is. And I think that is unique to our campus.
Yeah, so I think people have pretty much gone over the main gloss of what I would say. I think Yeah, so we're located in a socially progressive area. We can debate that on like a lot of levels, but we are located in an area that has, and I would debate that on a lot of levels, but we're located in an area that has groups like American Friends Service Committee, like Western Mass Jobs with Justice, like the Pioneer Valley Worker Center, groups that are doing social activism and organizing. We are a very union-dense campus, which is something that's really important to me as a labor activist. And I think the history of UMass as an activist campus, as a troublemakers campus, is really, really important, because we talk about the importance of institutional memory, and for me, that's not just like, okay, how do we learn from our mistakes? How do we remember what we've done? But also, how do we get new people to want to participate in this work? Is we say, look at what happened when people occupied Goodell. Look at what happened when there was a student strike in 2007. Look at what happened when students organized to get student jobs back in 2011. Like that story for me about 2011 was one of the main reasons that I ran a campaign 2 years later. And so knowing your history and knowing that your history is this rich, complicated history of activism, and knowing that, and those are things that there's people around you who have experienced that and who want to teach it and pass it on to you. And then cycling into being that person who's trying to teach it and pass it on to other people, I think is huge.
Yeah, thank you all. And so a lot of you spoke about your personal experiences a little bit when talking about what makes UMass unique in terms of student organizing. But our next question is, how has student organizing shaped your personal growth, and how has organizing at UMass shaped your personal politics?
So, dang. This is a dissertation question right here. So, the biggest thing that I learned I think the biggest thing that I've learned over the past year, as I've been continuously becoming more seasoned in terms of organizing and social justice work, is the fact that I personally feel that this doesn't just go for UMass, but it just goes for a lot of us, everyone involved, in the movement, in the struggle, whatever way, shape, or form. We are very great actors, but we do not take the time to reflect. And we don't take the time to reflect, not only and I'm not talking about debriefing in action, I'm not talking about debriefing a lobby, I'm talking about doing that kind of, messy kind of work of evaluating yourself, what kind of person am I, what kind of person am I, what am I bringing to the space, how am I impacting this space, what have I learned from point A to now, in which has shaped me to become an organizer, what has brought me to the dance, if you will. I don't think that we do that, and I think organizing has helped me become more of a reflective, introspective person. I think a lot of people frown upon this. A lot of people outside of the organizing circles frown about it. I think a lot of people inside of organizing circles frown on it too, because there is this idea that there's more important things to be done. You get out of your head and actually go pass out a petition or go phone bank or whatever the case may be. And I think it's very invalidating. I think that it's just as important, as I said before, it's just as important to do this kind of work, to do that really, personal, very vulnerable work, as it is to, do a lobby day. And this is not to try to invalidate the importance of lobby day, but both of these things are important, because I think the goal, at least my goal in organizing, is to not only, while we're bringing future generations to a better space in which we did not have the privilege or the luxury of seeing at our, during our tenure at UMass, it's also to bring ourselves to a space where, wow, I did not know how, effed up my ideologies were way back when. And it's not to then beat up on yourself, but it's, wow, this is the stuff that I've been conditioned to learn, and look how long it took me to unlearn this, and look how much I have grown over these past years, and look where I am now as opposed to then. So there's a lot of space for us to really harp on the importance of reflection, being reflexive in this work, and organizing at UMass, organizing within USSA has really given me the space. It's okay to take a step back. It's okay to say, all right, time out. I can't do this right now. I can't be constantly on go mode because there are things that I'm neglecting for myself that are just as important as what you're doing too. And this is not to say that I'm neglecting my responsibilities to the organization or to the collective or whatever the case may be, but I have a responsibility to myself to work these things out amongst me so I can be a better organizer to you all.
Seriously. Yeah, I think Josh hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways. Yeah, so there's a few things that I'm going to try to hit. For me, I've already talked about this, but shifting from a service-oriented mindset to a power-oriented mindset, from service to organizing and being able to make connections to things that are larger and structural has been huge, like so huge, in what activism and organizing at UMass and on a national scale has done. I definitely have gained a lot of connections to people in the national student and labor movements, for which I am eternally grateful. Those people are my family. I got to see them this weekend at a conference in DC, and like those are like the people who heal my soul. Not to be corny, but it's so real. I'd like to think that I'm more aware of what happens around me. I think I'm more tuned in. I was the 4-year-old who used to sneak into the TV room to watch world news. And my mom was like, there's people dying, she can't be watching this. So I did start out like pretty weird and wanting to be tuned in, but I think I hope I have a better way of connecting and analyzing the content I receive. And yeah, the question about constantly trying to be challenging myself and learning how to accept challenges from other people, learning how to be more reflective and work through my assumptions and my preconceived notions, and just even the way I react to things in a really thorough way and a really self-critical way without hopefully being too awful to myself. And yeah, I think right now is an important moment for me to give credit where credit is due. I am a person with a lot of privilege, and there have been a lot of the people who have pushed me and challenged me and educated me in the last 4 years have been fellow students of color, women of color, queer students, trans students, non-binary students, gender non-binary students. So to be able to say that the knowledge that I have now is not often of my own production, and it is like something that comes from the labor and the emotional labor and the intellectual labor of the people around me, I think is like critical for me to acknowledge, and to say thank you not necessarily to people's faces, but to like express that gratitude and acknowledge where that push and that challenge and that knowledge has come from.
I will say, one of the main reasons why I love working on this campus is I learn far more from my clients, my students, teach me a lot about these issues, and that has made for tremendous professional and personal development for me on issues that are important. And what I've learned, though, is that when you sometimes think that change can be slow and progress can be slow, particularly at a bureaucratic institution, students don't have time for that, right? As it was talked about, you're here in 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and there's no time for change to be slow, because it will miss you. And so there's an urgency there that I really appreciate, that there is a desire to get things done now because who knows what will happen when I leave. And that urgency, I think, really incites this action, immediate action, getting the information and taking immediate action, that I think is so wonderful to see, that you're here for 9 months, right? And university administration will wait till the summer and they'll try to make changes. And so the amount of activity that can happen in 9 months, the amount of change that you can that has happened in 9 months is so wonderful and has been so wonderful for me to experience.
So in terms of my own growth and shaping me my politics, first and foremost, I think my experiences helped me to understand changing demographics and the needs, and I continue to explore those things as an administrator working with really diverse groups. You mentioned sort of coming from a service mindset to more of a power-oriented mindset. I can say during graduate school was when I really sort of learned that lesson a little bit, when I took a class with Gary Mullaney, critical service learning, and understanding the difference between like community service and critical service learning, and looking at things from the root, and so looking at things from a root cause, which that experience has then impacted me and influenced me in terms of how I approach situations working with students. Working with faculty, working with staff, and just in my everyday life, really understanding that things are reciprocal, it's give and take, and that we learn from one another, and that it's not just me sharing information, but that it's a service, that I want to serve others and others are serving me. And I think that my experience with activism, my experience with looking at things from a critical perspective, that has been shaped through my experiences as an advocate, as an activist, someone that was involved. And then also understanding that institutions of higher ed can either perpetuate social injustices or they can interrupt them, disrupt them. And then also understanding places, right, and how we can work within a system, we can work against the system, but what's most effective in terms of change. And so I see my role as the Director of Multicultural Affairs as a way to implement some of that change in a productive way where people can hear me, and that I can also assist with the conversations that are happening, the dialogues that are happening in a way that are productive. And knowing, like Corey said, sort of ways of legally being able to do that with the potential of change. Because we do. I think about my experience as an undergrad, there was lots of places where I came from an angry place, but also a really loving place, and understanding that if I wasn't coming from an angry place, there wasn't a need for change, right? But that there's a way that people can hear you. And so I think that my experiences shaped me in just sort of continuing to explore changing demographics, thinking about things from a critical perspective, and working within a system to change a system.
So I wasn't actually supposed to be here. I mean, in the larger sense, I went back to school to become my major was a biochemistry and molecular biology, and like for the first year I was on Dean's List and I went to class and all this other stuff, but then other things came up, and after I got my undergraduate degree and I moved on to the closest thing here at UMass that is an organizing degree, and that's the labor studies department here at UMass. And then I was further enabled by the American Friends Service Committee when they gave me a job full-time to make trouble here in Western Massachusetts. I mean, I think that in one sense, organizing is about challenging power and changing society. And there really is no degree to which we can talk about that too seriously. I mean, that's really, it was just something that sort of came up that I was sucked into, whether it was the war or issues with the Office of Illinois Affairs or the SGA elections or the strike and all this other stuff. The prospect of changing society, changing the conditions under which I lived and my friends lived, and and challenging the power, whether it was the folks in the Whitmore administration building or whether it was, you know, the larger target of, you know, being an anti-war activist and that sort of thing. I mean, I think that that's far more, at least it was far more attractive to me than being a biochemist. And I think that panels like this are really important, and the role of student activists, which I imagine many of you, maybe most of you are, cannot be stressed. The importance of that cannot be stressed enough. I mean, there's this one view of the world, which before I came back to school, I was under the impression in which, you know, you graduate from high school and you graduate from college and you get a job and you go about the world and every 4 years you vote for a president or whatever. But then there's the other view of the world, which is that you actually have agency in it, and that no matter where you are in the world, you can actually band together with other folks and express your agency to do something good and to change the conditions under which you're living. And that, yeah, that's definitely better than chemistry.
Can I say one other thing too? Is one thing that I learned too is not to have to take a neutral standpoint as an admin. For me, my experiences as an undergrad, as a graduate, and just someone who I think is really active and involved with her community, that you don't have to take a neutral standpoint in order to sort of be effective either. Like, so I think that faculty often, they choose not to share their opinions or their thoughts about things, but we all have, there's diversity in thought too, and so it's really important, I think, to exercise your rights to express yourself, your thoughts, and, you know, back those up with things like data or research, but also lived experience is also really important too. And so, you know, my experience might be very different than Corey's, but both are equally important. And so being able to express that and not have to take sort of a neutral standpoint, I think is also really important, that I've learned and that has that has influenced me and shaped me and who I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to open it up for questions in the audience. If anyone has questions, just raise your hand, I guess. Yes. Yes.
My name is Yoichi from Japan. I just got it. And I'm working at a non-profit organization to promote activism and activism on campus in Japan. So I really impressed you what you did in this campus. It's so great. And when I was a student, I would like to study here. So my question is, so is there any tendency of the student activists? For example, in Japan, the experience of childhood is really important. Students from Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Okinawa tend to join the activism. Hiroshima, Nagasaki is famous as atomic bomb, and there is peace education. When they are elementary school, they listen to the storytelling of the survivor. So this experience to promote empathy. Also in Okinawa, there are so many Navy, American Navy basement, and also there are related crime. So when the people see the social injustice, the sense of social justice grow. So my question is, so is there any tendency of student activists in your campus?
Is that for all of us?
Yes.
So I think one of the tendencies that we have is to look at each other and try to push this idea of like there's one way to do this and everything else is obsolete, it's not valid, it's not appreciated, and it's not, there's no space for it. So if you're not actively out, taking over Goodell, then you're not doing anything for the movement. If you're not in the picket line, if you're not getting arrested, if you're not getting yourself to spaces where you have an attempt or you might get arrested, you're not doing anything that is helping the struggle or helping the movement or helping our cause. And that is so far, that's for me, that can't be farthest from the truth, because again, we have non-traditional students on this stage. A lot of my friends who organize, they're international students, so if they do get arrested, they're at risk of losing their visa and they can't be in the country anymore. So therefore, it also takes a lot of like looking at yourself in terms of, okay, I have the ability to get arrested, so that's cool for me, but I should not be pushing that for anybody else who A, is not comfortable doing it, or B, has a lot more to lose than I do. If they are arrested or if they are in a space where they can be kicked out of school. I think that one of the things that I learned very on in student activism is there's room for everybody. There's room for everybody to do anything at any time, as long as they're trying to push and organize and rally toward a common good. We need everybody. We need the folks that are going to be up packing those folders. We need the folks that are going to be doing the phone banking. We need the folks that are going to be in the picket line. We need the folks that are going to call, whomever it may be, call the teachers to let them know that, so and so is not going to be in class because they're going to be at this rally. We need all of these people to be invested in it, and we can't afford to be pushing people out we can't afford to be pushing people out because we think, in our own perspective, that what they're doing is not enough, because we can always be doing something more, and therefore I'm not the sole arbiter of what your contribution is, how legitimate your contribution is, and what more you can be doing when I have more to be doing myself. So I think that's a really big tendency in the movement that we have, is to look at each other and begin to wag a finger, and not looking at each other as in terms of like pushing and challenging to look more critically or think more critically or do a lot more because we see the potential for them to do more. It's looking at them with a very judgmental lens in terms of you went to class today when there was a rally, so therefore you're not about this life. That's a real tendency that I see. That's something we really need to cut out, just in general, not even just in the student movement, but just in activism in general.
Can I just, some things that you triggered for me? I'm gonna bring in some theory a little bit, but you mentioned sort of, what activism looked like in the person that might be out on the picket line or the person in the building, but then also behind the scenes, kind of, right? And so I think about sort of everyone is needed, right? There's lots of voices to be heard, and I also think about Kimberly Crenshaw, who I don't know if you know who she is, but if you don't, look her up. But she talks about the intersectionality, theory of intersectionality, and basically thinking about the intersections that we have, the commonalities that we have, or how we live our experiences, because we're not just black or white, we're not just gay or lesbian or straight, we're not just whatever, put the social identity in the box, okay? And looking at the connections and the intersections that we have of our own identities and the connections that we have with others. And so, once we see that, and we can really stand in, I think, solidarity. And so, I think I like her, I like what she has to say, and I would encourage you all to think about that as you go through the world, navigate the world, as you band together, thinking about the intersections that you have within your own identities, and then with your peers, your coworkers, your classmates, your cohorts, because I think that's really key and important as well.
To the question, I think those who are most affected, afflicted, oppressed are often the ones that will rise up to make the most change. I mean, I think in my time at UMass, the first, some of the first activism that I was involved in was with the Office of Law Affairs. It was primarily with students of color who were pushing back at a number of different, racist policies, incidents that happened on campus, and that was not the first time. In fact, if you look at the history of UMass, it is often students of color, which are a minority on campus, far more of a minority than they should be in terms of population. It's students of color who have risen up and caused the most change. And the other thing, the other aspect of this, I think, is that the more that we can foster a community in which pushing for change and trying to make the world a better place and not accepting the status quo the more that you create that community, the more that will happen. And I think those two factors contribute to, or might contribute to, why students from Hiroshima and Nagasaki are perhaps the most active.
So I'm going to take just a second to critique, maybe a little bit harsh on, like, this beautiful picture that we've painted of UMass organizing and activism, and just point out a few things that I see as tendencies. I think in a lot, and not all, because there are, like, really incredible groups that are, you know, working class, poor students, students of color who are organizing. A lot of UMass activism tends to skew white and middle class. And that's like a really real thing, and there's a lot of, we don't have a ton of time, there's a lot of factors to unpack into why that happens. Part of it is, you know, if you have the time to be organizing and not the time to be fighting for your survival in, quite frankly, a university that doesn't support poor students of color to the level that it should, you might have time to go get arrested. You might have that ability and that privilege to butt heads with the police without fearing physical retribution. There are, like, those are real things. If you're struggling with a huge amount of student loan debt, that might mobilize you to organize against student loan debt, and it might keep you feeling like you have to keep your head down and push for a job when you get out so you can survive. And so I think both things can happen. And I don't think it's, I think there's a thing around, you know, why aren't you involved in this? And it's like, okay, well, people are facing really real barriers, but there's also a culture that keeps people out that is really white and middle class, and I think just, like, silences a lot of voices. And the other critique I have is that the student activism here, at least, I don't know how true this holds on other campuses, but it can be really insular. So people turn in on themselves a lot, and they'll tear each other down, and they'll fight each other, but they're not fighting the outside forces. And so you kind of lose sight of what's happening around you because you're so busy, like, you know, fighting within yourselves about social power or social capital or whatever it is. There was one more thing I was going to say, but I'm going to.
Cool. Any other questions? I'm so sorry.
I just wanted to see if there's anyone from Springfield College. Any students from Springfield College in the audience? Oh, okay, never mind. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Are there any community college students here in general?
Yeah. Okay. You had a question in the back?
Hi, I'm Tashina from St. John's University, a Muslim scholar, and our program is completely social justice based, which is all here. We put on, like, a lot of awareness type of events. So I have, like, it's kind of like a two-piece question. One, how do you get people to show up to these kind of uncomfortable type conversations when one side may, you know, feel uncomfortable because of the topic matter, because we have issues with, like, people actually coming out to the event. And two, how do you incorporate the activism part with the awareness, or in our case, like, you know, the awareness with the activism? Because our campus, we don't really have all of these types of unions and organizations that you guys have, so that's not, like, a big piece at St. John. So, like, how would you do that?
I'm still trying to figure out how to get people to come out to programs, so that's a good question. I mean, food is one. And I think because the people that, for me, I noticed that a lot of people that are coming to programs, right, or these events or getting active are the individuals I think that we've all articulated. They're the people that already know, right? The people that need to be at the table are the ones that are sitting back in their cozy, privileged, whatever. So I think it's, for me, part of it is one-on-one conversations with people, starting off with just, again, building trust. And so a prime example is as an individual, I just started at Springfield, but there's an individual who, has some interest in the work, but has privilege and it has fear, right, about taking risks and being vulnerable. So instead of placing that person in a room full of people that have, we're all at different levels and understanding, just sitting down and having one-on-one conversations and building trust. And so I think it can be taking it, micro movements, one step at a time with individuals one-on-one. It could be bringing food to an event. It could be, word of mouth and getting people excited. I still am trying to figure that out myself, and so we just continue to do different things to get people involved, and try different programs that might speak to an individual. I can say also from an administrative perspective, I worked in admissions like I mentioned earlier, and I did a diversity training for one of the colleges. I won't speak to which one, and for the entire staff, and half the staff was like, this doesn't pertain to me, I don't need to do this. And so it was like, again, one-on-one conversations, and then finding a topic that was a topic that could be relevant and useful, but that also people could relate to. So we ended up starting with class because race was, we can't talk about race, I'm not ready for that conversation. So we started with class, we gained trust, and then we moved forward to then talk about race. But again, there's this thing called intersectionality, and how when you talk about class, you're usually talking about race. When you talk about race, you usually talk about class, so on and so forth. So it's finding a level of comfort to be able to talk about some of the uncomfortable conversations. Another thing I would say is sometimes you have to just put it out there. How do we become comfortable with being uncomfortable?
I wholeheartedly agree. I definitely was. First of all, y'all from St. John's, right? Oh, thank you. I'm from Brooklyn, so I see y'all. You know what I mean? I see you all. You gotta go to Golden Crust, get some rest right. You're gonna be all right. That's gonna be all right right there. That's gonna get everybody in the door. To talk about the idea, like one-on-ones are incredibly important, especially for folks who are becoming more conscious, more whatever the word we like to call woke, whatever we would like to call it, who are beginning to understand their whiteness, their maleness, their cisness, and wanting to do something about it. Like the one-on-one is incredibly important, but I will preface that if you would take nothing away from this conversation, please take something. It is not the oppressed job to then educate the oppressor on why they're being oppressed. That's something that I need to impart onto y'all. I think that this is something that this panel and the moderators, we wanted to impart this onto y'all because we're not speaking in the idea of now you need to go out and educate people on why, this is what it is, because again, there's still a responsibility that they need to hold up if they're truly going to be your ally. So that's one thing. And I think the second part of the reason why I hold one-on-one so important is because I personally lay it on the line in terms of nowhere in this this movement, in this struggle, I never gave you a piece of paper and I signed and promised that you were going to be comfortable every single time. And I would be lying to you if I said that I did. And I also would say that there is a space where if you're coming to a meeting or you're coming to a real talk or you're coming to a movie screening and then a discussion, so on and so forth, understand that you're going to be in this space for a finite period of time, and then you can leave that space and go back to your comfort and go back to acting like this never happened, and then you can then still travel throughout the world with carrying your male privilege, carrying your cis privilege, so on and so forth, and then act as if you don't know what's going on, and you can be conscientiously ignorant, and then begin to then say that, well, nobody told me. Well, now that we can't say that now because you now know better. So if you know better, you need to do better now. So it's like I'm the kind of one, I'm not the first person people call on to do one-on-ones because I just don't care, you know what I mean? You gotta ease into me, you know what I mean? I'm the fifth person they speak to, so because you gotta get comfortable with me too. I gotta get comfortable with you, I gotta get comfortable with me. That's just how it is. But I think the idea of actually finding a mutual ground in which you all can build, finding your floor and then building off of that in terms of what does that mean? What if you have to talk about class, we need to start with class. If it's gender, we need to talk about that, but not then capping that conversation with that, understanding we need to build off of different impressions and understand how they intersect and how they compound, and then really figuring that. And it's incredibly hard to do. And finding that medium is something that we all struggle with. Like, people have written dissertations on it, and we still don't know what the formula is. If you have it, please let us know. But it's the idea of actually being comfortable in the discomfort and being honest with people. I never promised you this is going to be uncomfortable all the time. This is something that is very real, and people have to live with a lot more discomfort, and discomfort is a euphemism at this point in time, than you do in this particular space. So you need to understand, like, well, what is your wage? What is your stake in this? And if your comfort is something that you're going to prioritize over the survival of other people and the livelihoods of other people who are more marginalized than you are, then you need to really think about whether or not you belong, or whether or not you really want to work in these spaces.
Okay, so on getting people to come to your events. I was in ResLife for 2 years, and I will say food. You want to strategically, we're talking about strategy, right? You want to strategically plan when you serve the food to trap people in the room so that they come, they get invested. The food they don't come in, take the food and leave, which I did as a freshman. But on a college campus, like, feed people food. If you have funds, feed them pizza or something like that. And if they're always getting pizza in that dorm, feed them wings. Like, like, switch it up a little bit. Because people will be like, we had pizza last week with Danny or whatever. And you're like, yeah, okay, but I need you to show up. And another thing is, if you have, like, strategic community members who this works, like, well in a dorm setting. So, I'm a junior and I'm working with freshmen, and, like, freshmen don't think I'm cool because I'm not. And so, like, I'm not going to be the one who, like, if they show up, they're not like, oh, my friend Jenna said show up. They're like, oh, my friend Mitchell said show up. Like, I have a friend who I'm talking to their friend, and their friend is recruiting them. So, like, finding those people who we call community leaders. And then another thing is, like, if you're mobilizing, or if you're trying to get people to come to a conversation about race, and you want white people to show up, and it's being led by students of color, like, talk to the white people who have, like, identified themselves as wanting to help you, and tell them that, like, it's on them to mobilize other white people. Because, like, that is something that someone who wants to help you out should be invested in doing. So, like, you're doing a panel on trans identity, like, your cis friends who are always like, oh my God, like, I love your hair. Like, it's not enough to be, like, that person who's like, wow, you look so beautiful. Like, you also need to mobilize, like, your friends, your cis friends, and, like, show up, and also, like, have those conversations with people who you trust, who are in the, like, group that you're not focusing on, or, like, the marginalized, I'm not wording this perfectly, but the marginalized identity that you're trying to, like, discuss, and have those people who have the privilege be checking in with, like, being attentive to the other people with privilege, because, like, it's not the job of a trans person to be checking in on, like, cis tiers, like someone who's cis who shows up to a meeting should be, like, checking in on other cis people who are, like, upset, uncomfortable, like, expressing things that aren't okay, all of that stuff. So those are my 2 things: food and mobilizing people.
I think the problem with information sessions and, or that information awareness and that sort of thing, raising awareness rallies or whatever, is that one, you're going to get people who have their awareness already raised, that are already on your side, and 2, people don't really want to go somewhere to necessarily just learn something that you think that they should learn. I think most people are brought in because, 1, they know of a problem and they want to change it, and 2, you're offering them something to do. I think that's something that I've made the mistake of in the past many times, is that when you don't just hold a meeting, meetings are often like the death of anything, but, like, give people something to do. And the people who are already inclined to do it will show up, or somewhat inclined to do it, maybe will show up, and you'll get them, and you'll get more and more people each time. And the other thing that I want to say, just because we spoke on it before, is having a movement that has joy in it, and that isn't just about tears and challenging each other and so on and so forth. But Emma Goldman said, "It's not my kind of revolution if I can't dance." She actually didn't say that, but that's a different story. We'll go along with that. And Sut Jolly, who's a professor here of communications, said that if you want to unravel capitalism, you have to make the alternative at least as fun as capitalism, because why the hell would anybody show up? And so I think that's part of the challenge, is in all of these very often depressing, often despairing issues that we're trying to address. It is the job of organizers and activists to be able to inject some sort of mirth and humor and joy into it. So that's something I think that should always be kept in mind.
All right. Thank you so much, our wonderful panelists.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna do my thing. So if you all want to actually gain more tools and not just like listen to other people recount their stories, which maybe was good for you, maybe wasn't, I don't know. There is a weekend workshop called the Grassroots Organizing Workshop, GROW for short. It's a project of USSA. Josh is a GROW trainer. You can get people, two GROW trainers to come to your campus and teach you all about how do you build strategy, how do you use effective tactics, how do you choose a campaign that is successful. So you can get a beautiful soul and mind like Josh to show up on your campus and teach you things and teach you how to win and how to create things that you enjoy and that you think are meaningful.
Can I just say thank you to y'all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to create change?
Yeah, so we are like 2 minutes over time. I apologize, but thank you all very much. I hope that you really enjoy the rest of the IMPACT conference. And thank you again to our panelists, who are really great. So, yeah.